Is okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presidential session. Well, the presidential session is something that was a feature in the past for Siop Congress, but for a couple of few years it was not done, and we decided that we do it again. And for this presidential session, as a president, I could choose the topic, and I choose the topic that we thought that it's a very important issue where many of us don't receive any specific training, where many of us are seeing that are receiving more presentations at Siop. So then I was a bit selfish, and I just called for the best. I will sit back there and learn from the best. I hope that you would do the same. So let me introduce now Julia, and she will lead the discussions. And I would like to thank the participants and institutions from the participants for agreeing to come. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Guillermo. I'm Julia Challinor. I'm a pediatric oncology nurse and a medical anthropologist and an educator, and I'm an associate adjunct professor volunteer at the Department of Physiological Nursing at the University of California, San Francisco. And it's my great pleasure to moderate the first half of this presentation and session today. I'm joined with a second moderator for the Q&A discussion session at the end, and that's Dr. Sumit Gupta. He's from the Hospital for Sick Children. He's a staff oncologist, a clinical investigator in the Division of Hematology Oncology, and appointed at the University of Toronto Associate Professor, Department of Pediatrics, Institute for Health Policy Management and Evaluation, and Institute of Medical Sciences. I'm going to give you a little bit about Dr. Guillermo Chantada, because he is the head of outreach program at the Pediatric Cancer Center in Barcelona, and he is also on the National Council of Research in Argentina and the scientific director at the Hospital Universitario Austral Argentina, scientific director of Pediatric Hem-Onc Service in Montevideo, Uruguay. So I think he deserves, even though with his very short introduction, some background. And he's the president of our Siop, which most of you are aware of. So we're going to start off with a presentation about qualitative research in general and an introduction for those especially who are not familiar with this methodology. It's my pleasure to invite to the podium Professor Dr. Martha Grootenhuis. Come on up, Martha. Professor in Pediatric Psycho-Oncology, Group Leader and Project Leader of PROM Facility, specialized in research into the psychosocial consequences of childhood cancer. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you, Julia, but thank you all for inviting me to this beautiful and wonderful lecture. And I think, Guillermo, you made a real good choice to doing this. So I will give you a sort of little introduction about qualitative research, and I've got nothing to disclose. But first of all, I'd like to ask you who in this audience has conducted qualitative research. So could you please raise your hand? So that seems like quite a lot. And so once again, for the ones who have no experience with it. Okay, so I see limited hands. So this will, this will probably, I can go fast through my slides because you know a lot about it. So, but when I was thinking about introducing qualitative research to you, I think, there might be people who associate this to anthropologic research. And I was thinking, should I add a slide about this and let's try to find something? And then I realized, actually, I had pictures of this in my own personal photo books, because this is my father. And my father has been an anthropologist and has been doing work in Papua New Guinea in the 60s, where my brother and sister were born. And I think this picture shows you already what qualitative research is. It's about field work, it's about narratives, hearing the voices of people you are studying, it's ethnography. And qualitative research now is much more than it used to be, but they still add to each other. So my talk today will give you some very light general background and reflections on qualitative research, which for you, because you are a very experienced crowd, might be very known already to all of you. And then I will give you some examples of my own work in the Princess Maxima Center with my PhD students who are working from a qualitative perspective, and I'd like to share with you some examples how qualitative research adds to our knowledge. So what is it and what is it not? Because, so this audience I don't think is representative, because if you think about quantitative research, you are all experienced. Quantitative research is, I think, the most common in medicine, I would say, common on our conference. And if you would look at this, these are some of the general background things about quantitative research. So surveys, questionnaires, and experiments. And I want to really address, this is often about the how many things are happening. Statistical analysis are descriptive, prediction, models, associations. It includes bigger sample sizes. And there also is related to power to calculate what you would need to study. It's hypothesis-driven, and it's usually a shorter process than qualitative research is, although I would argue a bit about this because doing quantitative research is also a long, long process. Other things which relate to quantitative research are replication, objectivity. It might be static, so you design a study and you don't change anything anymore. And concepts like internal validity or external validity, reliability and objectivity are related to this. And so if you put qualitative research next to this, we are talking about different approaches. So the approaches are focus group interviews, observations, and not the how many, but the how. What is happening? What is the story? What is the pattern we see? So the analyses are different. They relate to themes, they relate to patterns, so it's very different. It's smaller, it's explorative, it's about finding meaning and understanding. So again, against short process, longer process, because there are a lot of steps involved. Subjective, flexible, because sometimes during the process of qualitative research, you might think, okay, I need to adjust my interview a bit because I see something happening or I'm hearing something, so you also analyze during the process. I might need to change the focus of my questions. And then saturation is a very important topic which is not known to many quantitative researchers, that at a certain point you've heard the same story again, and it seems like you're not going to get more new information. And topics related to this are credibility, transferability, dependability, and conformability. And I'd like to point to the review at the bottom of the slide, which is very informative. So a little bit about how you do it. It's grounded theory. It has different techniques, like I already mentioned. Interviews, focus group, ethnography, so like really participating and transcribing everything you hear or video. You have to write down everything you do. There might be new tools available these days, so you can like DeepL, or you can have the information easily instead of typing everything down. But that is, you always have to be very sensitive to anonymity, because you might have patient data, and you also always should check the tools you are using, what happens to your data. I already mentioned saturation, and then also coding is a very important part of qualitative research. The content analysis, the thematic analysis, so finding the patterns. And you have programs to do this, but you can also do this by categorizing it by yourself. And so this is a picture of one of my PhD students doing this manually, and it easily shows you also how complicated it is. So she typed down all the interviews, all the words, from the children who were responding to a tool which was developed, a family tool, and we were categorizing this, and it shows you how it goes. I would also like to address something about reporting qualitative research. This is just an example of a student. The content is not what it is about, but what you will see in these kind of results are quotes. And you use quotes to show what you have seen in your data. And if you are working with quantitative researchers, they will usually respond like this. Could you please add numbers? Could you please add percentages? What did you measure? And I want to address again, this is all about quotes, the material it is. So now I would like to transfer, I've got 7 minutes left for my examples of my own research. I would talk a little bit about these 3 studies, reflect about genetic sequencing, the contact study, which is about impact of diagnostic conversations, and the approach study, which is about symptoms and palliative care. I'm going just to show you very light some information about these studies, so it's not, I cannot do this in detail, but what I want you as a takeaway message of this is how different approaches, perspectives can bring you more material. That's the message in here. So if we look at the REFLECT study, this is a study about participating in a sequencing study, so doing the sequencing. One part was the sequencing itself, and the other part was we are studying the impact of the choices of participating in this. And we have been conducting a questionnaire study and interviews, so we did both. I think that's the topic here. You have 2 sources of information. And what we found, we asked the children who decided to participate in this study. And if you ask this with a questionnaire, the responses say that the children report, I chose myself. I made the decision. But if you would, we interviewed them as well. If you interview them, it's more than just deciding yourself. They tell how they have been around the table with their parents, talking about this, thinking about it, reflecting on this, and then they decided to participate. So these 2 sources give you different information, and that's the key message here. So this other study, which is the contact study, some of you might have heard this in the early career session yesterday in the PPO. This is about the insight in oncologist experiences in communicating a pediatric leukemia diagnosis. And we have audio taped this very first conversation, so families just coming into the center. We have interviewed pediatric oncologists, and so this is the sample on the left side of the slide. Both pediatric oncologists as well as parents, and this was qualitative design and thematic analysis. And so we also interviewed the parents a little bit later than the pediatric oncologist. The key message here is different perspectives from different people. So pediatric oncologists, mothers and fathers. So what do we hear when we are looking at the results? And this is just a glance at the results of this. That one of the results, the thematic analysis of this data, shows that the pediatric oncologist is constantly monitoring the family and providing direction. And this is how the quote of the pediatric oncologist would go. A lot of people want to know how things will progress in the long term. For example, regarding vacation and school. But most of the time, I keep it a bit vague and suggest we will revisit those aspects at a later moment. And I say to them, let's talk about the first 4 weeks for now, and I bring them back to the level where I think they should be. So that's the perspective of the pediatric oncologist. In the interviews with the parents, also reflections came forward about this providing direction. And one mother said, but when you already have asked a couple of times, what does the future look like? And you keep getting some vague answer, at a certain moment, it levels off a bit. And I think, is he not able to give the answer, or does he not want to give the answer? Quote from the mother, a quote from a father. This is not particularly all the same the same conversation, but it reflects for you how families are responding to this. A father is responding. She tried to say very clearly, first to 4 weeks, then we will decide to which group you belong, and you know better what the rest will look like. Because the paths after the first 4 weeks are just too much to go into detail now. Personally, I like to look a bit further than 4 weeks, but I understand the consideration not to tell it. This shows you the different directions and the different reflections of the different participants in this conversation. It also shows you how difficult it is, because every parent is different, which in this case, pediatric oncologist, gives you the difficulty of how to focus. But these results show, for clinical setting, that the sensitivity, how important it is. So my last example from qualitative research is the approach study, early start. We have not. This is about gaining insight in the experiences of children with cancer and explore their needs at home. And my message here is the method, because interviewing children is not that easy, and we need different ways to do this. And one potential way to talk about their experiences in a visual, tangible way, and we have been using Lego. And here you see that we first ask them to write down their symptoms, and if they have a few, we also provide them a list of symptoms from literature where they can choose from, and we ask them to build what they are experiencing. So the higher the tower, the more difficulties they have. And we also ask them, can you please think about what would help you if you are experiencing these difficulties? And we have little puppets and things added to give them to do that. And so this is an example of a child who built his experience. And here you can see how the trajectory is provided by the child. And I think this is really beautiful, a way to have children experience or express their emotions about difficult things in not a very, like an interview setting. So, in conclusion, I've taken you on a very, very short journey on qualitative research, and I think I hope I've shown you that it adds value by providing depth in the context and deeper understanding of the experiences. It's also interesting to consider new approaches such as play and multi-methods, so taking the perspectives of different providers into account, but also using questionnaires next to interviews. And I would like to end with that qualitative research gives color to our work. And I'd like to thank all the contributors of the studies and point you to the work I've presented. And I made a mistake. It's Saturday for the psycho-oncology Reflect study. That will be a talk. And tonight there's a poster about the conversations diagnosis. So thank you all.
Thank you, Martha. It's very difficult to ask a qualitative researcher to say something in a very short period of time, so you have to forgive us. This is really painful to be condensed, but that was a beautiful overview to get us started. It's my pleasure to introduce Elianeth Kiteni. She's an oncology nurse specialist. She was at Muhimbili National Hospital in the pediatric oncology ward for 2011 to 2024, and is now just started as a global nursing program coordinator at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital as a global nursing program coordinator. And she's going to speak about her experience with the SANOFI ESPOIR Foundation qualitative evaluation of her project back in 2018. Welcome, Elianeth.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk to you, or I'm going to highlight the potential impacts of the qualitative research, and I will also discuss how it can be well implemented in the low-income country by using my experience with my Child Matters Nursing Program award that I got, and it was evaluated in Tanzania. So my Child Matters Nursing Award program It's a program that supports nurse leads project in low and middle income country. And since 2015 to date, there are about 45 projects that have been funded by this program from 26 countries, Tanzania being among of it. And when you talk about Tanzania, it's a beautiful country that is located in the Eastern Africa with the largest mountain, with about more than 3 national parks with the big 5 animals. I thought like I should brag a little bit about Tanzania. So you're all welcome to come and visit. However, how beautiful it is, the estimated childhood cancer survival rate in Tanzania is between 5 and 25%, this is similar to the survival rate for many low and middle income countries, where the third or less of children with cancer are expected to survive, in contrast to the high income countries, which is 80%. So Tanzania, like any other countries in a low and middle income country, face limited healthcare infrastructure challenges, particularly those offering specialized cancer care, with only 2 major hospitals that offer this specialized cancer care, one offering for adult cancer care and the other one for children and adolescent cancer. And most patients have to travel far to receive care, and many arrive too late for effective treatment. And another challenge that we face is the knowledge gap among the healthcare workers, who often misdiagnose cancer as a common illness, such as malaria or tuberculosis, these are the kind of the disease that have been given public attention more often in our country. But also we deal with the cultural barriers, where traditional beliefs often influence how family perceive illness and delay treatment. So from my perspective as an oncology nurse working in the pediatric oncology unit for many years, more than 10 years, I was so caught up, like most of children that come to Muhimbili National Hospital, it's a national referral hospital, they could come up with the advanced stage. And I was so curious to know what happens, why children become, they get delayed. And trying to understand why children arrive to this hospital with advanced stage, I encountered repeated stories from the parents. Like they will always tell you, like, I went to the hospital when the child started to be sick, and they will say it is malaria or it is tuberculosis. And this caught my attention, and I realized that there was knowledge gap in recognizing early warning signs of childhood cancer at the subnational levels, particularly in the Northern Highland Zone, where the pediatric oncology services were scarce. So it prompted me to come up with a project proposal to close the knowledge gap, particularly in this zone, on the early warning signs, on the identification of early warning signs of childhood and adolescent cancer to the healthcare providers that are working in the primary and secondary level hospitals in that hospital. So I led this project with the funds from My Child Matters and in partnership with the Tanzania National Nurses Association in this zone. And the main goals were was to improve nurses' ability to recognize early warning signs of childhood cancer, as well as equipping them, the healthcare providers, with the knowledge, and also empowering the community. So as I said, the main focus was for nurses, but also the program also raised awareness about the childhood cancer to the community within that zone. So up to September 2019, 152 nurses were trained in this region, and the key outcome of the training were found to be improved knowledge on the early warning signs or early warning, identification of early warning signs of childhood cancer, and also there was increased confidence among nurses in recognizing these signs. So after the implementation of the project, there was a project evaluation that was conducted. And the aim of this project evaluation was to explore and understand the expectations, experiences, and dynamics related to this project, which was implemented in Tanzania by using the qualitative research methodology. And this evaluation was conducted by a local physician, Tanzanian physician who was well experienced in qualitative research, and an in-depth interview was conducted in person to project-led nurse, but due to pandemic issues, the other participants were interviewed through phone, and all these interviews were conducted by using Swahili language, and then later it was translated into English. So by using this qualitative, there are several narratives that happened during this evaluation where the nurse leaders the nurse trainers who participated in this evaluation, they tried to express their experiences and their views concerning this project. And some of these, like this one nurse trainer explained that the healthcare providers showed a lack of awareness about childhood and adolescent cancer, and she further said that after the training, the nurses were able now to identify these early warning signs, but also to recall and reflect some of the symptoms that the children presented that they have encountered before. But also another nurse, we heard from the nurse learners where they were so excited about the training, and they expressed how and they foreseeing to be good mentors to the other healthcare providers within their regions and municipalities. But also through this interview, the participants were comfortable to express challenges they encountered during the implementation of the project, as expressed by one of the trainers who expressed that due to financial constraints, the training had to be condensed in one day. In addition, one of the Tana leaders expressed that they once received a call from the region that there was a child who was identified with the cancer, but due to referral challenges, they were not able to refer the child accordingly. So they had to find a way to support that child to meet the hospital. So the evaluation revealed that the training had a ripple effect. The nurses who received the training began sharing their knowledge with their colleagues, creating broader awareness in their region, which led to positive case identification as a result of nurse intervention. And this shows how qualitative research can highlight success stories that inspire further improvement in healthcare. As a participant in this evaluation, I experienced firsthand the importance of being interviewed by a local researcher. Speaking in Swahili allowed me to share my thoughts freely, and this conversation made me feel more natural and allowed me to share my experience without feeling judged. But also, I think involving local researchers in qualitative research or qualitative methods who understand the cultural and the social context of the place really makes the participants feel more comfortable and allows the qualitative research produce more authentic and insightful data. Based on my experience, I strongly recommend qualitative research for anyone working in the low and middle income country because, first of all, it provides deeper insight. While quantitative data tells us what is happening. The qualitative research tells us why it is happening and how we can address the root cause. And in our case, for instance, we learned that some of delays in cancer diagnosis were not just about lack of equipment or resources, but also due to cultural belief and knowledge gap at the local level. But also the qualitative research, it empowers the local voices. It allows us to hear directly from the people on the ground. It can be nurses, can be parents, it can be any community that you've been engaging to that study. So these voices are very crucial in shaping healthcare interventions, which are relevant and effective in low and middle income contexts. So by involving the local researchers, it ensures that the data collected is accurate and respectful of the community's value. And lastly, it is very adaptable. Even in the challenging condition, qualitative research can be flexible. For instance, this evaluation, we had to adapt to remote interviews due to pandemic, but we were still able to gather valuable data that informed our next step in flexibility and our next step. And this flexibility is essential in low and middle income country where the change can happen quickly. So in conclusion, I want to encourage anyone here working in low and middle income countries to consider incorporating qualitative research to their work. Yes, it comes with the challenges, but the reward far outweigh them. Through qualitative research, you can gain a deeper understanding of the realities on the ground, make informed decisions, and create interventions that truly make a difference. I've seen firsthand how qualitative research has transformed our approach to this project in Tanzania, and I want to encourage you all to do that. The most important thing, make sure that you empower your local researchers, listen to the voices in the ground, and let their experience guide your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elianeth, voice from the field in Africa. We're going to now shift frame. And Dylan, why don't you come up and stand here, because Dylan's going to show Dr. Dylan Graetz from the pediatric oncologist, director of culture and communication at St. Jude's Research Hospital. And unfortunately, Rihani, Dr. Rihani could not fly here for some reason, and so she's going to be missing, but she's chairperson, Department of Pediatrics, Director, Qualitative Research Center at King Hussein Cancer Center. So they have going to share with us a 5-minute video about their project at this Qualitative Research Center for Qualitative Research for Eastern Mediterranean.
Qualitative research, to me, is a way that we can transform stories and experiences and perspectives into science. And so, to me, it's essential in advancing cures for catastrophic diseases and pediatric cancer. And I think it allows us insight. It allows us to explore questions that quantitative methods, other methodologies don't allow. It allows for empowerment and the patient voice and the parent voice and the clinician voice.
I think that qualitative research is crucial for pediatric hematology oncology because it helps us to uncover the emotional, social, and psychological impact of cancer on pediatric and young adult patients, and as well as their families. And this understanding can help us to improve the patient-centered care and the support for these families.
it was a matter of responding to the needs of our partners and working with them to build something. But it has really come out of, again, a need identified by KHCC and the desire on both sides to build capacity there.
St. Jude's role is really to provide expertise, but to be a collaborative partner in the endeavor to expand research globally. Part of our mission here at GPM is to help mitigate disparities, and one of the areas that has potential for growth is this area of research.
So KHCC is a leader in pediatric oncology care that provides comprehensive cancer care, and is also always striving for innovation and expansion and excellence. So it will be serving as a center of excellence in the region and will be serving as a center for capacity building and qualitative research.
In July 2023, this center was established, and the main aim is to reduce the gap in qualitative research in pediatric oncology and to improve the well-being of our patients or the pediatric patients and young adults through qualitative research.
نعم، هسه مشاركتي في البحث النوعي ساهمت فهم الأطباء المشاكل والتحديات والصعوبات اللي واجهتها يعني في أثناء تواجدهم يعني.
They said, this is what we're interested in doing, can you help us figure it out? So the fact that they embraced the methodology is step one. And they've really proven themselves to be very innovative in how they approach research on childhood cancer and other catastrophic diseases. And they have the capacity and the institutional support to really push this forward. So yeah, I think KHCC was ready for it. They've established themselves as leaders in this type of research.
Again, when I think now, 5-10 years, my hope is that we'll have centers like this in every region. Again, because I think we are currently doing multi-site work and we're doing analysis in English. If we had centers all over that could collaborate with us and with each other, we could decentralize, and it would increase not only capacity at each of these sites, at each of the regions, but really globally. It would increase our ability to do cross-cultural qualitative research.
بنصح المرضى وعائلاتهم انه يشاركوا بالبحث النوعي حتى يشاركوا افكارهم وارائهم وتحدياتهم وحتى يفيدوا غيرهم.
So Qualitative Research Center at KHCC will serve as a center for building capacity in qualitative research and enhancing the outcomes of pediatric childhood cancer care across Jordan, and hopefully at the regional level will increase the pool of researchers in qualitative research. And through that, we aim to enhance our global and international communications, networking, and influencing health policy and advocacy, and ultimately improving the outcomes of children with cancer across the region and hopefully globally. Thank you so much, Dylan, and we do miss having Rawad here, and so, but you got to see her on the screen for the voice. It's my pleasure now to introduce training qualitative interviewers of children in Uganda, Gemma, Bryan, PhD and MSc for Research Fellow from the University of Surrey in the UK. Take it away, Gemma.
Thank you very much for, oh, I don't have slides yet. There we are. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. Sorry, is that better? Yeah. Okay, and so I have nothing to disclose. So children's voices in research have historically children have been objects of research rather than the subject of research. The views of children, if they were sought at all, were generally via their parents, their healthcare professionals, or their teachers, because of the dominant view that children's own accounts of their lives couldn't be relied on. The child-centred inquiry movement started in the 1980s and the 1990s and is characterised by an emphasis on the child's own salient concerns and issues. This movement was boosted by the ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989, which formalised the notion of seeing children as valued persons within society. Under the UNCRC, children have a right to seek, receive and impart information and to express their views in all matters which affect them and have these views taken into account, and this includes in research. Children are now seen as active participants in the research process with unique perspectives on their lives, and we really should be empowering children and listening to what they have to say. So how do we listen to children's voices? Qualitative research is a way of elevating children's voices and positions them as experts in their own lives. An example of this is the SPARK study. SPARK is a St Jude global study on which I work as a qualitative research consultant. SPARK aims to understand the perspective of patients, parents and multidisciplinary clinicians from low and middle income countries about upfront decision making for children with advanced and incurable cancers at diagnosis. This study is being conducted through a lens of child-centred inquiry, a form of social constructivist critical research which upholds the rights of children and young people and positions their voices at the centre of the research process. So SPARK is taking place in 3 centres, Guatemala, Uganda and Jordan. Team members from all study sites are involved in the design of the study. Across the study sites there are many differing views of the cultural appropriateness of sharing information with children with cancer, and so therefore we co-created a decision-making activity that allowed us to talk about making decisions with children with cancer that didn't actually include the word cancer. And this used decision cards and Lego, and I didn't think I was going to be... I'm really pleased I'm not the only person talking about the joys of Lego today. So the contextual and cultural knowledge provided by our team members in local sites in helping us shape this work were really pivotal. There is a great potential within this type of research for partnership between child-centred researchers like myself and clinicians trying to solve problems in lower middle income countries. In terms of doing the actual data collection, how do you find the person who just happens to speak the local language and is already on site? Obviously, this isn't always possible. And what we did in SPARK was to take people already working in paediatrics at local centres and train them in how to do research with children. We delivered approximately 14 hours of in-country face-to-face training across 2 days at each site. This training was purposefully informal and was split into a mix of lectures and practical activities. It also wasn't specific to SPARK. We spoke in general terms about qualitative research, and such as the need to build rapport with research participants and how to probe for more information during an interview, and then discussed in detail how specifically we were going to do that within the SPARK study. We were keen to widen participation at each site and train a team much wider than just the research team. So in Uganda, we trained 8 people in how to do qualitative research. Day 1 focused on the basics of qualitative research and how to conduct interviews, and Day 2 took what participants had learned and applied that and how research with children is similar and different. We spent a lot of time talking about the importance of power dynamics and ascent and descent and the ways of asking questions which gave space for children to share their views. Not just the concerns of researchers like ourselves and what we wanted to ask, but really giving space for children to share what they wanted to tell. So this on-site training wasn't just the end of the story. At the end, so the components of the research study are then reiterated in a Zoom session immediately before data collection starts. We also offer weekly Zoom hours, debriefing sessions, and review and feedback on each interview transcript. It's this is really the best way of developing expertise in conducting qualitative research is practice, and in Spark we aim to give the support for researchers to do this and the practice element as well. So my colleague Marta is speaking about the development of the decision-making activity on Sunday, and I hope we can join us. And the last slides, I'm just out of time, sadly. But one of the difficulties in doing qualitative research is at training. And the study for the Spark study, the development, the course we'd conducted has been implemented into this wider qualitative design and methods course, and it's available via St Jude Global and the Cure for Kids program, and it's free. So if anybody would like to access that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and I hope you all caught the QR code. If not, maybe Gemma can share it with you after. I know sometimes they come up very quickly and it's hard to get your phone. We're going to jump shift. We're going to now switch topic to implementation science. Thank you. It's still not advancing. Oh, you're going to fix it? Okay, thanks. So I'll do it like this. It's my pleasure to introduce Caitlin Duffy. Dr. Caitlin Duffy from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. She will be doing an overview of implementation science, and then we'll have an example following her of it happening in Mexico. So, Caitlin, welcome. Oops, sorry. There you go. Am I going forwards? Yes, sorry. Let me let him control.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin Duffy. I'm a pediatric oncologist and global health researcher, and I love implementation science. I'm really pleased to have been invited to talk with you today and give you a clinician's approach to implementation science and really advocate for its role in what we do in pediatric oncology. I have nothing to disclose, but I do want to make a couple of acknowledgments. First, I am not here to replace the incredibly important work of those that are on the ground and that are implementing pediatric oncology care. But I also am not trying to convert everybody in here to be implementation scientists. If you're interested, find me later. But I urge you, just like our science is better when we have friends who are biostatisticians, your science is better when you have friends who are implementation scientists. Because the work that we do is very complex and can be very daunting. And I really view implementation science as something that gives us this foothold to figure out where we start to implement this really complex care. So today I want to give you an intro. What is implementation science? When and how do I use it? And why is it important in pediatric oncology? So I'm going to start with an example. This cake just went through a randomized control trial. It was tested against every other cake across the world and statistically significant, better than everything else. So naturally, we want to be able to make this cake, to give this cake to our patients, our families. So what if I took this half of the room and I said, guys, I want you to make this exact chocolate cake. I want it to look like this. Don't worry, I'm going to give you everything you need. You can have the flour, you can have the sugar, you can have the cocoa powder, you can get all the utensils. How many of you can make a cake that looks exactly like that? I think some of us, if we have experience baking, if we bake all the time, if that's what we've been trained to do, yes, maybe we can make something that looks like that exact chocolate cake. But alternatively, if we take the other side of the room and I say, guys, here is this step-by-step recipe, how much you need of each of these ingredients, how you mix them together, what you need to do step by step, on average, more of us are going to be able to make a cake that looks more similar to this. And that's really the essence of implementation science, which says, how do we take something that we know works, that is evidence-based, and make it so that we can deliver it in the real world? Because more often than not, we know that doesn't happen. So we see these clinical trial results that show excellent survival. We try to implement them in the real world, and it doesn't work as well. And that is kind of known as the no-do gap or the discovery-delivery disconnect. And that's what implementation science is all about fixing. So this is a figure called the 17-year odyssey, which you're going to see in every implementation science lecture you ever get. But it basically walks us through the idea of how long does it take for something to go through the discovery process and ultimately make it into the real world. And I think a lot of the stuff that we focus on in these earlier steps are what we think of as traditional clinical research. But the truth is, this last step, do we think that it just like magically happens? We know that it doesn't. We need to think about how we translate this research into the real world and really view this as a necessary step of the scientific continuum, because we're not just applying what's known, we're actually generating new knowledge that's related to delivery. And so implementation science is the study of methods to promote the systematic uptake of research findings and other evidence-based practices into our routine practice so that we can improve both the quality and the effectiveness of the service and care that we provide. In other words, how do we get what we know works to people who actually need it? So this is a public health-focused discipline, and we're really looking at things like population-level impact. It's very multidisciplinary in its origin, and so we take tools from things like political science, philosophy, business and organizational science, psychology, sociology, economics, and we use them all together. And this is not the methodology if you are looking for like a quick win or to address like some sexy problem. These represent a methodology to create incremental but important solutions to complex problems. And thinking through complex problems, it's really been only in the last 10 to 20 years that we've seen it be applied to these more complex medical subspecialties like infectious disease, HIV care, and cancer care. There's a couple of core principles that really govern how we work through implementation science and apply it to problems. One, very broad collaborator engagement, and that's not just the multidisciplinary team, but it's really thinking about who these cross-sector types of relationships within the community, because you want to bring all of those people together to really create the solution to address the problem that you have. And in doing so, it really makes everybody part of the scientific discovery process, and in that kind of builds capacity amongst all of those collaborators. Number two, your environment determines your effectiveness. Your environment determines how well something works. We know that your real world is multi-level. So it's not just you as the clinician that determines how care is delivered. It's the interactions between you and your team. It's the interactions between you and the hospital that you work in the community that you live in, and in the policy at the national and international level that affects how you can deliver care to that patient. And there are things at each of these different levels. Some of them make it easier to do what we want to do. They're facilitators, and some make it harder to do what we want to do, and those are barriers. Number three is implementation science is a system-based approach to solve system-level problems. And in doing so, it really reinforces these principles of equity and justice, because we're saying equity, not everybody needs the exact same thing. You really need to tailor what you're doing to make sure that you improve access for everybody that needs access to drug, treatment, etc. And also justice, because sometimes it's not just about the tools. It's how do we actually think about changing the health system so that we can deliver the type of care that we want to deliver. And fourth, to really maximize effectiveness, we need this balance of fidelity and adaptation. Fidelity means, are you able to give it as it was designed? And we often think of this as like, did you give the protocol as it was written for the clinical trial? And you want to balance this with this idea of adaptation, that for some reason you might not be able to do that. Maybe there are drug shortages, so you can't use that particular drug. Maybe you realize when you delivered it with fidelity, you caused a lot of toxicity. And so you actually are going to improve how effective your therapy is going to be if you decrease the intensity of that. And so it's really just about balancing these two pieces. Number five, as we learn to overcome local challenges, we actually are creating new knowledge that's much more relevant to a broader audience. And implementation science says let's leverage what is learned by applying a really standard language so that we use the same words when we talk about barriers and we use the same words when we talk about strategies so that somebody else can pick up and do what you did. And by doing so, it really improves the generalizability of what we're learning so that we can make it easier for someone who's in a similar setting trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do. And it also helps us disseminate these findings so we shorten that time to translation. Number six is that it has this theoretical underpinning. And by that, I mean we use established theories, models, and frameworks, and so you're not really starting from scratch. And I love this cartoon because it's like, we are all too busy. We all have problems that, yes, we need solutions for, but sometimes you're just like trying to drudge through it and get done what you need to get done when somebody else might have already created a solution that will help what you're trying to do. And so with these theories, models, and frameworks, it really provides us a systematic way to think through those key steps to address a problem and identify what can impact your implementation being successful or not successful. And when I've given this lecture before, people will kind of stop me and be like, Caitlin, this is common sense? And I say yes. But have you ever been in a situation where you're having a conversation with somebody and you realize that your common sense is not the same as their common sense? So for that, I say this is a great tool. And that's because we often don't see things as they are. We come in with our own view that affects how we view different problems. And so by using these theoretical underpinnings, we're actually able to minimize the guesswork. It makes us more efficient at solving problems. We are able to minimize our own internal biases and thereby increase the rigor of what we're doing, which is important as scientists. So when and how do I use implementation science? This is just an example of what we have all learned as the scientific method, what our traditional approach to clinical research is. Implementation science is the same. There's a couple of like fun extra steps that we're going to talk through. So you're implementing things that we already know work. You're using a theory or model and framework to help guide you. You're using implementation strategies, and you're measuring implementation outcomes. And we'll go through those in a little bit more detail. Sometimes it's helpful to think about these in kind of non-scientific language. So what we're implementing is the thing that you want to do. The strategy is what you're doing to help people do the thing. Your outcome is what you measure to know how much and how well you did that thing. And implementation research says, let's create new knowledge about how to best help people and places do that thing. So the thing can be anything that is evidence-based, and we think of these as like the 7 Ps. So it can be a program, it can be a procedure, a clinical practice, a pill, a policy, a principle, or a product. Anything that falls within that realm you can use implementation science for. How do I think through picking some of these different theories and models and frameworks? Because there are so many when you look in the literature. There's over 100 that you can choose from, and it really comes down to what question are you asking. So if you're asking questions like, how do I guide the process of translating research into practice, you need a process model. If you are trying to understand what is influencing my implementation outcomes, what are the barriers, what are the facilitators, you need a determinant framework. And if you're asking how well is it being implemented, you need an evaluation framework. It can be a little bit of like alphabet soup, but here's some examples. So when we think about process models, you may have heard people talk about EPIS or knowledge to action. When you hear about determinant frameworks, lots of people have heard of maybe CFER, which is one that's very commonly used. And then when we think about evaluation frameworks, you might hear people talk about like RE-AIM, but there's a lot of different options. When you're thinking about how you design your study, it is the same as what you already know how to do. You can use observational study designs to define your barriers and measure your outcomes, or you can use randomization to test the effect of the different strategies and see which of them is actually more effective for what you're trying to achieve. The difference is that here you're asking implementation questions with implementation outcomes instead of efficacy questions with efficacy outcomes. We also realize that sometimes it's more efficient to try to ask questions at the same time. And so there's a new type of study called a hybrid study, which says, yes, we want to know that it worked, but we also want to know that we implemented it well, because that gives us even more faith in our results for our effectiveness. When we think about an implementation strategy, I think it's helpful to start with this kind of example. So let's say you are in a healthcare setting, you recognize that there is high mortality to an infection, and so you want to implement a guideline so that you can use antibiotics in a specific way. And you go and you measure and you look at how things are going, and 6 months later, nothing has changed. And you feel discouraged, and then you take a look again, and you realize that there are implementation barriers that are impacting your outcomes. It is hard to incorporate that guideline into your clinic workflow. That is poor feasibility. And only half of your doctors are using it. That is limited adoption. And so we use implementation strategies to improve our implementation. And so you decide that you're going to adapt this guideline so it fits within your clinic workflow, and you're going to create clinician reminders. And 3 months later, you see that that guideline is part of your routine clinic evaluation. You have better feasibility, and providers are using it. You have better adoption. And so ultimately, 6 months later, you did what you set out to do. You were able to reduce mortality due to infection because better implementation is a necessary prerequisite to clinical effectiveness. Implementation strategies are this how-to of implementation. They're a very active process. And as I talked about, we use a standard language. And so there are examples of strategies that people have already used, and also ways to match barriers that exist in your setting and help you figure out what's the right strategy for you. How do we measure the impact of what we're doing? When we think about traditional clinical research, yes, we want to know what the health outcomes are. But if you're implementing something that already went through a clinical study, it already went through a phase 3 randomized study, that evidence exists. If you're just measuring health outcomes, this takes a long time, it costs a lot of money, you need very specific data elements, and you need them consistently, and you need a lot of research capacity. And honestly, if you're only measuring health outcomes, you're really solving for a question that's already been answered, and also not really solving the question that you want to know is like, does this work in my setting? And so that kind of information is maybe necessary, because as clinicians, we all want to know that what we do works for our patients, but it's really not sufficient. And so we want to ask questions like, can everyone do it like it was designed? How well are we doing it? Is everybody using it? How well are we doing it as it relates to quality at my center? And that is really the core of implementation research. And so we measure things like, was it feasible, acceptable, appropriateness? Was it efficient? Was it timely? And the benefit of these is that you can measure them much earlier and much faster than these traditional outcomes. And so it actually means you can respond and change what you're doing to make sure that you're improving implementation over time. And you actually need good implementation, again, upfront, to ultimately get to where you want to be with health outcomes. So in the last couple of minutes, just why does this pertain to pediatric oncology? So we know that this cancer survival gap exists. We've talked about it a lot. This, to me, is a discovery-delivery disconnect. And it happens for a couple of reasons, but one that I think is really important is that we have this methods gap in our research culture. So 80 years ago, survival was low. We really needed to know that the treatments that we were giving was what made the difference. Internal validity, super important. In present day, survival is high, but our research is still focused on this micro level, and we're prioritizing resources for these incremental change in subpopulations rather than implementation studies to really address these huge disparities. And we know that with the GICC goal by 2030, there's really this urgent need for real-world implementation knowledge. And so we need to shift to really improve external validity and generalizability so we can implement what works and scale that practical knowledge into new settings. That can be into a rural setting, into different geographic settings, into different income levels. It's not just high income to low income. And so pediatric cancer survival gaps shows us that there is this gap in this vital delivery data. And implementation and dissemination science is really a powerful approach to address this disparity and improve our real-world outcomes for pediatric oncology. And it provides us with a mechanism to enact sustainable, multi-level change, scale those solutions in similar contexts, and really identify opportunities where we can have bidirectional innovation that actually improves our field as a whole. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Caitlin. That was really taking a comprehensive concept and bringing it down to a manageable presentation in a way with enough detail that we could get a sense of what implementation science, a complex approach, is all about. I'm now my pleasure to introduce Julia Esther Colunga Pedraza. She's a pediatric hematologist at the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León in Mexico. She's going to talk about Implementation Science Project, the first and second Mexico in alliance with St. Jude Golden Hour Quality Improvement Collaboratives. Welcome, Julia.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this wonderful project. I have no conflict of interest. My name is Julia Colunga. I am a pediatric hematologist in Mexico. In my country, each year, 6,000 of children are diagnosed with cancer. And like in many other countries and other low and middle income countries, our survival rates are suboptimal. The health system in Mexico is fragmented with many differences in the availability of treatments and supplies. What is our evidence-based intervention? Golden hour is the optimal time to antibiotic therapy in fever pediatric hemato-oncology patients who present to emergency room. Research demonstrates that administered antibiotics within 60 minutes significantly reduce sepsis, intensive care unit admission, and mortality rates. The Golden Hour, like so many great projects, start in one hospital in Mexico, where one nurse was empowered to take action to improve outcomes for patients with cancer in her center. But how did this project expand from one Mexican center to 140 centers across Latin America in less 5 years? We have done what most great quality improvement projects do: have concrete aims, theory of change, execution theory, measurement plan, and a lot of engagement and dissemination. In 2019, the first collaborative involving 23 centers forming multidisciplinary teams and providing quality improvement training. These first steps provide us important lessons, and additionally, training of 53 Mexican quality improvement coaches, enhancing local capacity to support project expansion. The Golden Hour project is currently in sustainability phase in 85 centers, and other 53 new centers joined across Latin America. The percentage of patients that receive the antibiotic therapy in less than 60 minutes from over 10,000 events increased from a baseline 47% to 76% at the end on implementation phase. However, the results continue to improve even in the sustainability phase. We also observe how this reduction in time has impacted our patients' clinical outcomes, significantly decreasing sepsis rate from 14% to 4%, intensive care unit transfers, critical intervention to 6% to 2.4%, and additionally, mortality rates have decreased but don't reach the level of statistical significance yet. The intervention resulted in the prevention of more than 700 sepsis cases and 50 cases of death. It's difficult to summarize the effort of 5 years and hundreds of people who have made this unprecedented project possible in Latin America. The daily struggles in our workplace highlight the critical need for implementing quality improvement projects to improve outcomes for children with cancer across Latin America. Embarking in quality improvement can be scary. Access to training and mentorship opportunities has been a groundbreaking experience in Mexico. It is all about making a difference in our patients' lives. This project showed me that improvement and implementation science are a powerful tool for saving life. Thank you for all the participants and families.
Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing your experience in Mexico in real-life implementation science. It's my pleasure now to turn the mic over to Dr. Sumit Gupta, who I introduced earlier, for a discussion, question and answers, and commentary. I know we have several qualitative researchers in the audience, so it doesn't have to be a question, it could be a comment, or you could share an experience that you have, and we're turning over to Sumit.
Great. Everyone can hear me? There we go. All right, so first of all, I wanted to thank all of our presentations. That was a total tour de force, geographically, subject matter-wise, and every single one of those was a massive accomplishment in itself. Also want to thank Julia Challinor for somehow managing to successfully keep a wide and disparate group on time in a short amount of time. So thank you to all. We'll open up to questions and comments from the audience. Maybe I'll take moderator's prerogative and start off with the first one for the qualitative researchers. You know, each of you presented examples in low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries of really incredible projects and that came up with really rigorously proven results. I wonder if I could ask you to comment on, you know, going from the IS perspective, what happens next after that? Because I think, you know, if we have a randomized control trial that says A is better than B, everyone in the community sort of knows what to do with that, even if we maybe don't do it well all the time. And similarly, if we have, you know, a new biomarker, people know that, oh, I need to validate that, and then we need to, you know, if you have really rigorous results that show that disclosures aren't being done well, for example, or that, you know, nurses' training is lacking in X, how do you actually take those results and convince decision makers, policy makers, that that rigorous qualitative study means some action should be taken?
Is this one on?
I think so.
I'll be interested to hear what my colleagues have to say, but I think, because I think the answer is there are many different ways to do this. I think, especially in pediatric oncology, as we all know, is a team sport, right? So even when we do research, we're not working in silos, and I think qualitative research can be powerful as an individual method and can be powerful as a component of mixed methodology and implementation science and quality improvement. And I think, you know, sometimes we think about sequential designs where you might do a qualitative study. So to answer your direct question of what comes next, you might do a qualitative study when you don't know what you don't know, or how to ask the right questions, and there just isn't much in the field, or isn't much in the field in this particular population. And then your results might inspire a broader study that is designed to create generalizable results, whether that's quantitative, whether that's an implementation science study. So sometimes another study comes next. I think sometimes it's the opposite, where you've done a quantitative study and your results don't make sense and you need to figure out why, and qualitative methods can often help with that. But I think to get to your last part of the question, which is how do you influence change, in my mind, most of us as humans are really compelled by stories, and I actually think that qualitative research can influence more political change than the numbers sometimes, and especially when paired together, when you elevate and bring in those patient and family voices, we relate to that, and it is at least as powerful as a significant p-value.
I can add just a little to it. I think Dylan already said a lot of beautiful things. It is the circle of seeing patterns, doing something with it, either in training or interventions or changes of work. It is a long process. And you need, and I think we cannot say often enough, you need a multidisciplinary team to do this, because if you are in a silo and you find something, it will not find its way to to the rest of the ones you are working with. So that would be, I think, very important.
Great. Thank you. In the front, please.
Hi, I'm Helen Damaris from the Hospital for Sick Children. Thank you for this excellent topic. Thank Guillermo for selecting it, and to all the panelists. My question is around the child-centered methods to elicit narratives in the focus groups and interviews. When my group started doing this with retinoblastoma patients a few years ago, we didn't know where to look for methods, and we made up one of our own. We used a toy that has a removable eye and asked the children to pretend they were doctors and tell us what, you know, a good treatment and good outcomes meant to them. So do you know of any other resources? Has anybody done a scoping review on child-centric methods? Should we do one together? Where do we find more resources?
I think this is a really lovely question. Yes, there isn't a scoping review as far as I'm aware. Yes, totally, let's write that.
Okay.
Because I think that often with the participatory child-centered methods, we take what we need to do and we develop a method for it, and that's a completely valid way of doing this type of research. It's all about engaging the child to tell you what they want to tell you. And I love the idea of this doll with a removable eye. I have so many questions about where you buy one, because I kind of want one. But yeah, this is a great method, and it's such an adaptable technique that can be used in different settings, and you can use them in high and low income settings. It's great for that kind of thing.
It reminds me, by the way, you know, psychologists have been using hospital play for years to elicit reactions of children, and I think that is also relating to your example. And I think there are also child life specialists who have so many techniques how to talk with children to know what their fears are. So I think an overview review would be really interesting. Yeah.
A new collaboration is born already. The gentleman in the back.
Yeah, Pablo Gonzalez from Mexico. I want to share an experience. The fact is that we did try, as Caitlin said, to replicate, in my case, in Jude 15 in Mexico. And we did not get the same experience. We did not get the same results. And the fact is that we were stuck in you know, p-values and doing that everything by the book. And then it took us to have a mindset change of mindset, to understand that, as Dylan said, that we had to ask different questions. Why is it that it's not working? Is it because patients are not complying? Is it because patients are not coming back? Is it because they're not understanding alarm signs? Is it because we cannot manage toxicity effectively? And it takes, you have to step down from the stage and be humble enough to analyze why is it that you're doing wrong. And we did find out that we did not lose patients to leukemia, we did lose patients to toxicity. And then Julia's work illuminates this one, because we did have to adapt the Total 15 guideline to Mexican standards and Mexican availability and Mexican capability of dealing with toxicity. And by doing that, and by incorporating Golden Hour Initiative and pediatric early warning scores and other strategies, nurse-based strategies actually, we have been able to raise our overall survival and diminish early toxicity related death. And the last part of this experience is that incorporating Golden Hour in our center trickles down. It has a ripple effect. Because once you incorporate nurses in this work, you empower them. When you empower your nursing team, you improve standards of care everywhere. It just doesn't stay there. So by telling nurses, you know, you can tell me, you can make this happen more quickly, you can tell me with pediatric early warning scores that patients are not doing well, you can call my attention. This improves standard of care. So whenever you have the chance to do implementation science, please do it, because we have seen, at least my experience, I have seen the impact of that and how it goes way beyond the initial intention. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the comment. The woman at the back, and then we have an online question, and then the woman in the front. Please.
Hi, Siobhan Cross from New Zealand here. I've got a question that crosses the child-centred qualitative research and implementation. How how much back and forth did you have? Because across countries and cultures, the place of a child in the family and in the culture is incredibly variable, and the way that you do child-centered research in one setting may be quite different, foreign and even taboo in some cases, to the way you might put it into another one.
So this is a really great question and really speaks to the importance of involving our local partners in this research. So we had a lot of lead up and development of particularly the decision-making activity, but also the questions that we asked as a children and the ways that we asked those questions. And the way why we incorporated an activity rather than just doing an interview was it gave space for us not to be talking about things that these children didn't know about or it wasn't culturally appropriate to do. And that speaks to the strength of our local collaboration. Ideally, we would have liked to involve some of the local children themselves in designing this activity, but working between 3 different teams of adults across 3 different time zones, that was tricky enough before we incorporate young adult survivors or younger patients. But it's definitely something that speaks to the strength of our team.
So we'll just go to an online question for Dr. Pedraza. So it says, congratulations for the great work you have done. How did you manage to change the mentality of the teams in the hospital to replicate the intervention not only in a few hospitals, but throughout the entire country and across Latin America?
Yes, I think it's very difficult because you have to start from scratch and change the culture. But I think the good results are drive to centers to achieve it. I don't know if Caitlin have any opinion.
No, I think that you're right. I think it's a complex problem, and going and recognizing the complexity and trying to figure out how you work alongside it rather than trying to change everything is the right approach.
Please, go ahead.
So this is a question for the implementation scientist, and it got me thinking. In one of your slides, Caitlin, you were showing the intervention, and sometimes you have a good idea, but it's not implemented well. So sometimes we tend to think very linear. It don't work, let's do something new. So it got me wondering, what is best practice regarding, is it time to completely scratch that idea, come up with something new, or is it really warrant to me to reassess, do I need to work on my strategy to implement that? How does one navigate that world?
I feel like the question about complexity, I could just say the same thing. I think it depends on what you're doing and the timeline that you need to achieve what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I would say one of the projects that we have been working on is implementing a complex therapy, and we knew that the primary thing that we had to focus on up front was the fact that there were no adverse safety events. And so I think that changes your strategy, and you're way more conservative, and you want to be very thoughtful about things and kind of a step-by-step procedure. And maybe that you would have a slightly different approach, and you would give teams more time to work through things if it was something like implementing a different type of guideline in a clinic setting. And so I think the answer to almost any implementation science question is it depends. But that would be what I say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
I just had a question specifically for Elianeth about the work in Tanzania. How did the qualitative research that you did inform plans for the future in terms of sustainability and support for staff or healthcare workers that are working on the front line? Because I noticed in your presentation you talked about doing education sessions with staff, which was hugely beneficial, but with the rarity of childhood cancer in terms of compared to other childhood diseases, maintaining those skills and ability to recognize early signs of childhood cancer is difficult, especially when you have high turnover of staff or, and so I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on future training and ongoing support for this stuff?
Okay, so thank you for that question. One of the things that this qualitative evaluation highlighted for us to move forward for sustainability and training other nurses, first of all, we realized that the one-day training was not enough, so we moved to 2 days training, but also we managed to involve to have a strong partnership with the Tanzania National Nurses Association, which is a very strong association that have a network of nurses all over the country. And so we make sure that this project has been owned by the Tanzania National Nurses Association and be introduced within the association, and it has become part of the project within the association. So they are making sure that the nurses within the network, they are also be introduced to pediatric oncology. So in every gathering that they do, they have the time, a slot time to talk about pediatric cancers. So this is how the evaluation has helped us, but also the Tanzania National Association, as I said, that they received calls from those nurses from the ground, like they identified cases, but they could not be able to support them to come to the hospital. So the Tanzania National Nurses Association have been managed to find more collaboration with other local organizations that can help to support those in such situation like that. So that's how it has been very impactful through this evaluation, because the participants who were evaluated, they were able to express all this freely without hesitating, like, am I going to be judged if I say this and that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one last question, if we could just make it brief, please.
Sure. Gaurav Narula from Tata Memorial Center, Mumbai. Thanks, this was a great session, and we worked closely with Caitlin on the implementation science project at our site, and an unexpected barrier, in Caitlin's word, that we faced was implementation of the implementation science project. And I think that's something which we need to talk about more. When Caitlin puts it like this, in a talk like this to a room full of medical people, it sounds so simple. But really getting the message across through ethics committees, through policymakers, administrators, is a whole new challenge. Of course, that's changing in our side, definitely, but I just wanted to ask Caitlin about your thoughts about that and some solutions.
Thank you very much for that comment. It's definitely been a learning process, and I think even at our own institution, we found it a challenge to try to kind of shift from what was a traditional clinical research approach to this implementation science approach. And I think maybe people had previously had experience with QI, but there were some things that existed with what we were measuring with implementation, and especially the fact that we were trying to take a hybrid approach that was just really hard to kind of wrap everybody's kind of brains around. We ended up having to do educational sessions with our own IRB, and also provided teams ultimately, after we started learning more, with resources for their own IRBs, because everybody had slightly different processes for how that type of protocol needed to be reviewed. Even though we had, de-identified clinical data that was retrospective with no PHI, sometimes because we were still collecting clinical data, that dictated us needing to go through different avenues. And I think similarly, trying to explain the objective of why we need to talk to each of those different providers, why we need to engage the nurses, why we need to engage all the pharmacists, all the physicians. It definitely was a learning process for me, and something that I think highlighted the benefit of having those kind of frequent touch points with the people who are running things at their local sites, because I think it really helped us learn how to move forward as we were expanding the program.
Thank you very much. There's an online question that I'll maybe pause and bring to Dr. Duffy's attention because it's for her specifically after the session. But now it's my pleasure to call up Dr. Nikhil Bhakta, who many people in the room will know. Dr. Bhakta is a core member of the Department of Global Pediatric Medicine at St. Jude's Hospital, and he has the unenviable task of trying to sum up this fantastic session.
Thanks, Sumit. And I actually think it's enviable because most of the points have already been made. So I just have to repeat whatever I thought was important. But before I do that, really quickly, I do want to take a moment. Guillermo, thank you for giving us this opportunity. I think, as has been highlighted both from the questions and the panelists, these are the future of where we really need to be thinking methodologically of growing opportunities in the pediatric oncology space. Julia and Sumit, of course, you guys have done an incredible amount of work putting this together. And again, Julia, I actually didn't think I'd have any time up here, so I didn't even bother to make slides because I was like, you know what, let them talk, it's not a problem. But, and again, all of the talks were wonderful. But just to summarize a couple of quick points that I think bear repeating and some maybe that are new. The first is, it's important for us to recognize that, for example, especially with qualitative research, Julia, Marta, many others have been working in this space for many years. This is not a new topic in that sense. And sometimes you're like, oh, this is new, I need to do this. And that's not a negative thing. What's new, I think, is that we're building capacity, that we're starting to develop the educational modules on Cure for Kids. And most importantly, we're starting to integrate these methods so that it's not just a one-off qualitative study, but then it integrates into what is the next step of that. Is it a mixed method study? Is it a survey? Is it something that we actually will lead to thinking about development of an intervention? It's that continuum, that integration into clinical practice that I think is really what is starting to change within the field, and it's very exciting. Because really we need to think about getting back to our roots and understanding context, and that's not just globally. I mean, even in the US, financial hardship is now all of the rage, but we still don't even ask patients when we put up our models and frameworks whether that framework reflects their reality. So really important work to be done, and there's no shortage of that. And that brings us to that second point, and I love the question from Tata and others, which is, that requires our own culture shift in pediatric oncology. And it bears worth repeating what Caitlin said. We put up the Hunger Mulligan survival curve, and usually it's like, okay, what's the next clinical trial? And not to take anything away from the importance of phase clinical research, that is still and always will be a core tenet of pediatric oncology. I encourage all of you to go to ASH as a disclaimer for Sumit. But there's a lot to be learned and done. However, there is still so much more beyond just the clinical trial. And so whether it's hybrid trials, whether it is implementation science and methodologies being incorporated to understand your facilitators and barriers to improve routine practice. Remember, childhood cancer survival in the mid-1970s, when SEER, which is our population or pseudo-population-based cancer registry in the United States started, was around 60%. The Global Initiative for Childhood Cancer now, 50 years later, is targeting 60% globally. We've known how to do this without genomics, without fancy drugs, without all of the things the tools and kits we have today 50 years ago. We just don't know how to actually, as Caitlin said, figure out how to do the thing everywhere that it needs to be done. So that's, I think, a critical important component. And then the last quick point that I'll just make is we are living in an incredible time of opportunity. I think the Mexico data speaks for itself, right? And what is great about this is we're thinking about scale, we're thinking about mixed methods. It wasn't highlighted, but the work that's being done with the Golden Hour is, yes, implementation science, but it's incorporating models and methods that maybe some of you who are older also know, which is quality improvement and PDSA cycles and all of this. So there's opportunities to learn how to apply and think about these methods in new and novel ways. And there's also now platforms between the GICC, with COVID. Let's all remember that 5 years ago we would join a WebEx conference, and remember that was WebEx before, and now it's Zoom and all these things. But we would join a conference and then we'd spend 15 minutes trying to get everybody to mute themselves and trying to get everybody to join in. We are in a different era now of collaboration and opportunity. And because of the GICC, because of the different partnerships, alliances, and collaborative agreements, because of PARC, and because of all of these new initiatives, we are able to work in different ways and in different models. That requires us to challenge and think about how to apply and utilize methodologies that may be outside of the paradigm in childhood oncology. And in that pediatric oncology space, we need to think about where these places go, and only because of these kinds of forums are we going to be able to get the new generation. So I would challenge the young investigators in the room when, and I'll say this as somebody who did the same thing, and if those of you who do the Enneagram, like there's like the 1 through 9 or whatever, I'm an 8 in case you couldn't have guessed it, and so that's the challenger. So I challenge you that when you have senior folks, when you have people who say, well, that's not something that's possible, that's not something to do, that's not a method, that approach, reach out to people on the stage, reach out to those that you see at the meeting, because there is a lot of opportunity here, and a lot of times people are a little myopic in their thinking, including sometimes myself. And then, of course, I would also then say mid-level and senior investigators, listen to your junior folks, empower your junior folks, let them take their ideas and run with it in a mentored, structured way, because ultimately that's how we're going to innovate in this space, and let them bring their ideas into this. And so really congratulations to everybody, and I can only say that this is really exciting to see how this continues to grow, and we continue to diversify the platform of methodologies available for our childhood cancer research opportunities. Thanks.
Great. So once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Chantada, Julia Challinor, all the speakers, and all of you for attending. Have a wonderful rest of the conference.